Hello, dream catchers, and welcome to another great day in the Writer's Haven. I'm your host, Helena, and today in studio is one of my dearest friends, award-winning executive producer, showrunner, entrepreneur extraordinaire, and author, Evolyn Brooks. Evelyn has production credits from OWN, Telepictures, King World, Lifetime, Bravo, We, MTV, Fox, BET, CBS, and NBC. And if that wasn't enough to impress the masses, she's an NAACP Image Award recipient and Emmy-nominated producer. The list of accolades go on and on and on, but today we're going to move away from the glitz and glam of Hollywood and go to the soul of this accomplished woman. Evelyn's book, her name is Cranberry, How to Befriend Cancer When You're Fighting for Your Life, is an account of how she survived breast cancer and healed her mind, body, and soul through prayer, acupuncture, Reiki, meditation, a healthy diet, and forgiveness. Join me in welcoming my dear friend and soul sister, Evelyn Brooks. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
I am just so happy to have you here to share your artistry with our audience, to talk about. I mean, there's so many things to talk about with you. I hope we have enough time to cover everything.
Yes.
But I'm just happy that I just have you as my friend and have you to myself and just be able to just glean all of your fantabulousness.
And that's a good word.
So I'm happy to share, but you know, there's, like I said, there's just so much that you bring to the table, and I think that you're just a real gift. And so I'm just going to go ahead. We're going to get as far as we can.
Yes.
May have to do another show.
Yeah,
we'll
do part two.
We'll have to do a part two. So as I mentioned, I mean, you're this very accomplished woman. Talk to us about your story in terms of how you got into the entertainment industry, and then we'll talk a little bit also about the challenge that birthed your book. But let's start with how you first started in the industry.
Okay. Well, it's interesting because it all goes back to my hometown of Cleveland, Ohio. And I wanted to work in media. I was trying to decide whether or not I wanted to be on air, like as a broadcast journalist, or whether I wanted to work in print. So when I was in college, I worked at the newspaper. So I was editor of the newspaper. Mm-hmm. And then I had to, do internships and the whole 9 yards. So I had an internship at the ABC affiliate and the NBC affiliate there. And I had this amazing producer. His name was, he was a professor. His name was Jaewon Lee. And I really, took to him, and he was my mentor. And he just really, kind of took me under his wing and connected me with, different people at the stations, told me who to talk to. So I decided that I was going to go into broadcasting, right? Mm-hmm. So my first job was at the NBC affiliate, right? And, when you talk about, how did you start your career, most people don't think it starts on the night shift. That's where mine started.
Okay.
It started as a news desk assistant.
Grunt work?
Well, you know what? There's no grunt work. Yeah, because everything leads to something if you're thinking about where you're trying to take it.
Yeah.
That's how I look at it. Mm-hmm. So my shift was 11 p.m. to 7. And so, and I listened to scanners. That was my job, to listen to scanners at night, and then to find out where the fire happened or where the murder happened or whatever. Mm-hmm. And so, eyes barely open, I'm listening. And so I realized that, okay, you could do this job forever if you don't figure out how to, move forward. Mm-hmm. And so my dream was to be a reporter, to be a morning anchor. So I was just okay, how am I going to make that happen? So what I decided was I had to get a tape, right? Because that was the thing. You had to get your tape made, and you had to send it out. Get your reel together. So clearly I had none of that, right? So I basically did something which I think is at the heart of everything that you're trying to build in terms of a career. And that's building relationships. Mm-hmm. So I just made sure that I got to know everyone at my station. So from, the editors to the producers, everybody. So what I was able to do, when everybody went home at 7 o'clock in the morning, I stayed on and I rode with the photographers that went out to get footage of whatever happened, overnight. And then I would get out and I would do a stand-up. And then I would write my story. Wow. And then I would go back, and I had befriended the editors, and then they literally would let me voice the story, and then I basically would make a story.
Wow.
So I got, I guess, how many? I think I had about 6 stories together at one point, and then I had a reel. So I thought it was hot stuff, right? I had a reel, and I think I had been there like, a couple of months, but that overnight shift was a lot. So I was like truly determined to figure out how to get out. So anyway, I finally got a reel together, and it wasn't as easy as I thought. I sent out about 60 tapes all over the country trying to get my first job on air, which was kind of crazy when you think about it, because I didn't have any real experience other than the fact that I thought that that's where I should be.
And you're not the kind of person that would let that stop you.
No.
Let's just say that.
It did not. It did not stop me. But in my mind, I was already there. It was just a matter of getting that one yes.
I love that visualization that you just said. That's so important. In your mind, you were already there.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
I know we're going to talk more about that.
Yes. In my mind, I was already there. I just had to find the person who saw me there as well, right? So I sent out all of those tapes, and I got my first job. And my first job was in Toledo at WNWO, and it was the 65th market, which was pretty amazing. Like, I started at the 15th market, but I was, a desk assistant, but my first job was in the 65th market, which I thought was a pretty good place to start. And I got out of that station after 6 months.
Wow.
And that was faster than any news desk assistant in the history of the station. So that was kind of like the start, and that was really like kind of the tactics that I used all the way to Los Angeles, trying to figure out what do I see that somebody else doesn't see, you know what I mean? And figuring out how to find your place and how to find it and how to create relationships with people so that they want to help you.
Right. And so that was the foundation of your matriculation through the industry to work with some really big names in the industry. You've worked with OWN and, the whole list of channels and networks that I mentioned before. That it was that young lady, that young woman who visualized that she was already there and allowed that vision to just guide her and lead her into her purpose.
Yeah.
Something that we talk about a lot.
Yeah.
And it's so important.
I think the thing that happened once I got to Toledo that I think is really important, and I think that truly helped me kind of find my purpose, which was producing, And when I lived there was a lot going on in terms of in the community. There was a lot of gang violence that was happening at that particular time. And I was out in the street as a journalist covering it a lot of times. And I saw myself having to go to someone's house after, a murder and ask the family, how are you feeling? Yeah. And it's like, well, how do you think they're feeling? And it was just so much going on, and I was moved by it. And a lot of times as a journalist, you have to kind of be impartial and report the story. But I just saw a story that needed to be more deeply reported. So in terms of the source, the issue underneath all of this violence that was occurring. So I went to my news director and I said, I want to do a special, like a 1-hour special. And no one had ever done that before. And he was just like, okay. And so we did a 1-hour special on teen violence. And, parents were there, kids were there, teachers were there, gang members were there. Wow. We got the entire community to come together and talk about this issue. And that changed the trajectory of my life, because I thought, wow, it's one thing to observe and report what's happening, but it's another thing to be able to shape and shift the narrative. And that was a very powerful thing for me to see, and I decided, let's go in that direction.
Yeah. And we're so happy that you did. Now, the book itself, which I do want to, definitely marry the discussion with the book, because the book is so personal, so intentional. It is a very big part of who you are in terms of how you have allowed your circumstances to not be an obstacle or be overwhelming, that you did not allow it to take your power away. I love that, the way that you say that in the book, and there are a couple of things I'm going to highlight from your book that I'm going to actually read from. But talk about, so you are a breast cancer survivor,
absolutely.
How did your diagnosis impact? And since we're talking about your career now, let's talk about how that diagnosis impacted your career. You talked about, how that instance of creating that 1 hour special just kind of changed the trajectory of your life. And in terms of timing and the chronology of that happening and getting the diagnosis, how impactful was that?
Well, it was extremely impactful, because when you receive a breast cancer diagnosis, it really forces you to step back and really look at your life and decide what is important, what is valuable. How do you want to spend your time? How do you want to spend your energy? And how do you create something that is bigger than just you, so that it resonates? Because the first thing you're thinking is about your mortality, right? And, is this it? And you have to really take control of your thoughts, of course. But then you just start to kind of, look at your life and think about, what is it that I want to do now? Because everything that I did before and the way in which I did it, you want to do it differently. You have to do it differently. Your body is telling you that you have to do it differently. So I think everything became more intentional. It's just like, what do I have to share? What do I have to give? And how could I take what I've learned and use it to help other people?
Yeah. And so how were the lessons that you discussed in your book, how did that kind of play into your life story? Because you have a few things going on, and I'll just go ahead and mention some of the things that I'm specifically thinking about, because of course those who haven't read the book have no idea.
Right. We're like trying to talk about it without spoilers, right?
Right. So we're going to do a little bit of spoiling. So in your book, it starts off, you talk about just growing up and some of the life lessons learned, and just being a young person. What is it safe to say, a little on the rebellious side?
Yeah.
A little on the rebellious side. Your parents had somewhat of a tumultuous relationship, and so as a young girl growing up and witnessing that, I don't know how much you would say that kind of directed your course in terms of how you look at relationships now as a grown woman. But let's put a pin on that piece.
Okay.
And then there were some other tragedies that occurred in your life that with some women it could have gone a totally different way in terms of how they handled that in their life. Yeah. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
So, it's interesting when you think about like how things happen in your life, and how we all have a choice to kind of decide, is this going to like take me out of here, or is this going to be something that helps me evolve and kind of go deeper as, into my soul, into finding out who I am. And so it's interesting because, prior to, going to college and prior to determining what I was going to do in my career, whether it's journalism or broadcasting or whatever, I was a young girl growing up in a tumultuous home because, my parents, they didn't get along very well. And there was a point where they separated, and I moved with my mother. And, she had been married for a very long time and, was kind of like, a free woman, so to speak. So she had a boyfriend, and that person had a friend. And they came over our home one day when my mother wasn't there. It was like a Saturday morning. And, I thought this person was a good person. I thought they were a friend of my mother's. So, I didn't know that I was doing anything wrong.
And you were 17?
I was 17.
At the time.
And so I opened the door. And then, there was this moment where I had an intuition, like, don't open the door. But it was just like I didn't know then how to own that. I didn't know to trust that yet. It was something that was still, would certainly develop after that. But at the time, I just thought, but as soon as I opened the door, I smelled alcohol. And I'm like, oh, I shouldn't have opened the door. And so he came into our home, and at that time, he raped me at gunpoint. And so for me, it was just kind of like, it was kind of like one of those moments where you're like trapped in your own body, right? And you can't escape what's happening. But you're trying to stay present so that you can survive. You know what I mean? You're thinking. It's like one of those things where you're trying not to make the wrong move because
there's this
gun. Could be, because there's a gun. You want to live, and then you're trying to figure out how do I, you're afraid to scream because then you'll get, he might shoot you or whatever. So then the craziest thing, and this is how I just always know, it's like my life, I feel like it's just I have a little angel somewhere. It's God, intuition. I just, there are moments in life when you know that you're guided and you're protected. And so literally he got up and he started to run out the house. And then I just thought, okay, this is so bizarre. And then I was laying there, and then I just heard a voice that said, get up and close the door. And I got up, I ran to the door, I closed the door, literally like pushing the door closed because he had run up the steps with two other guys. And literally, I don't even know what would have happened if I had not gotten up and closed the door. And so obviously I won't tell the rest of it that's in the book, but that moment, it caused a huge divide between, my mother and myself.
Because you felt to some degree that was her fault.
Well, I felt unprotected.
There was some accountability there that she had to own.
I felt like, okay, because in that moment she was kind of like, well, why didn't I open the door? And I just like, well, why is this person in our home? What I mean? I'm assuming that whomever you allow in our home is going to be safe, a good person. You know what I mean? So it created a rift between us that literally was not healed for, at least another maybe 10 years. And it just so happened it comes full circle, and you'll read that in the book. But the healing of our relationship came together when I was a journalist in Toledo, and she had breast cancer, and she came to stay with me, and she was able to attend the first that special that I created. And so we had a really full circle moment. in the midst of everything, because it's like you assume when someone is sick that they change or whatever. And so there was some element of change, and there was definitely growth, but we had to really work it out. But it was just a sacred moment, because part of moving through any challenge or tragedy or anything that happens in your life, it does boil down to forgiveness. It boils down to forgiveness of yourself.
Forgiving yourself, yeah.
And it also boils down to forgiveness of that person. Not forgetting, not allowing that person back into your life, but it is important to be able to like release them as well, because what I've learned is that everyone is in process. We're all kind of making mistakes. If we knew better, we would do better. I don't know what happened to that young man. You know what I mean? I never saw him again. But what I know is that whenever we do anything, whenever we do anyone harm, it stays with that person, and it stays with them. So I know that because that day and that moment was a turning point in my life, I know that it had to be in his as well. You know what I mean? But for me to go on, I had to release him and not give him the power to impact my life.
But understanding that this is a 17-year-old young woman who doesn't have the benefit of life experiences and exposure to other things to be able to turn that situation around in a way that you didn't allow it to take your power away.
I mean, for me, this is my testimony, because, I think about, when I was young, right? When I was, I don't know. It's interesting. Now when you think about the trajectory, and that's my word today, trajectory. But when you think about things that happen, right? And so my parents were not necessarily religious, right? But I had an aunt who was, right? Her name was Aunt Elvira. And she went to black church, right? Okay. And I just remember that I would just beg my parents, like, can I spend the night over on Elvira's house? And I had cousins and everything like that, because we would always go to church. And I mean, and that was probably started when I was like 7 or 8 or something like that. And I just used to love to go to church with her. There was something about the ushers and their white shirts and, walking down the aisle. And then, and you always had a pretty dress on. And then we went back to her house when we baked a cake and the whole 9 yards. It was always like, I just love the ritual of it all. And then the family aspect of it, because we would all go together. And so those are like early memories. So I can't say, I grew up in the church and it was always there for me. But I remember that was kind of an early part of my development, so to speak. And then when I got to high school, one of my best friends, I started to go to church with her, right? And then I got baptized when I was like 15 years old, right? Didn't ask my parents or anything. I just decided that I wanted to do that. So, but I always felt like a spiritual connection that was just my relationship. Nobody had to make me go or whatever. And so it's interesting when I say that I always feel like I've been guided, that happened when I was 15, and then 2 years later, this thing happens in my life. And so I just feel like that was God, like guiding me, protecting me,
That's where the strength comes from.
That is where it comes from. And it is something that, when you read the book and when we get to Cranberry, again, it's that same through line where it's like I'll find myself in these kind of life or death situations, and I'll have a dream, I'll hear a voice or whatever, and it'll say, do this, and then I'll do it, and then it'll like shift the trajectory of that moment. That's their trajectory number 3. But shift that moment, you know what I mean? So for me, that is what it is, you know. And I just feel like, you know, everything else kind of revolves around that. I think that's kind of what I moved to. It's like, you know, I meditate, you know, I love Reiki, eating well, all of those things. But for me, the most important thing, you know, when I wake up every morning, it is to center myself. It is to say my prayers. It is to connect and then go out into the world. But it's not the other way around.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much for joining us in the Haven and sharing your story and your life's work and just being the inspiration that you are.
Thank you so much.
So glad to call you
You're
friend.
so easy to talk to. Oh my God, I was so nervous. I really was, but it was wonderful. And just thank you for having me, and I really appreciate the opportunity. That's what really feels great tonight.
Yeah.
Here we go. We're gonna go out there in the rain. You're gonna get wet. All right, here we go. Go, okay, quick. Oh yeah, yes. So much fun. Mwah. Yeah, Dad. We're getting so wet. Oh,
Everybody has a dream. Mine was to see the ocean. And with a little help, I made it.
This is the moment I knew. His future had no boundaries.
There are some moments only the forest can inspire. Find yours at discovertheforest.org.
Hey, did you know 2.4 million loving cats and dogs in shelters and rescues need our help to find a home? Let's go to theshelterpetproject.org and meet if you are in a shelter near you. Harlow, oh, she's one great listener and loves to hear all your stories. My kind of cat. Cerulo is a sweet, goofy boy who's eager to please. Sounds just like another dog I know. So go to theshelterpetproject.org, search your local shelters and rescues, and go for a cuddle with your next best friend. Adopt.